Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you all for coming out here to see live humanism. Um, and and I want to say just to Marcus and Molly and the whole team, thanks for what you do to coordinate incredible humanist and freethinker community here in Durham and the whole triangle, because ultimately we are in, I think, a generational fight for our right to be who we are and believe what we want to believe, but also for a country that is based on a set of values that are not nonsense, that are not hate, but that are about a world where we all matter and are all lifted up. And the only thing that is going to get us there is if we do what the far right has done for generations and create spaces where people can come together and feel welcomed and deepen their commitment to this work because we are committed to each other. Right? Because the way movements work is they don't just rely on our commitment to ideals, they rely on our commitment to people with whom we share an identity. And it's in that spirit that I want to talk to you all today about hope. And I recognize there's a little bit of an irony in talking about hope during one of those times that American humanist Thomas Paine would describe as the times that try men's souls. Right? He wrote that 250 years ago in 1775. And he was talking about tyranny, about the psychological wound of living under something less than liberty. But what Paine also said, the part that we don't always remember, is that we have it in our power to begin the world over again. Not we have the power to wait for somebody else to begin the world over again, or maybe the world will begin itself over again, or something will come down from the sky and do it. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. And you see through everything that's happening, even under the terror of this administration, we see moments of light, right? We saw a couple weeks ago at the Supreme Court rejected one of the things at the top of Christian nationalists' wish list, right, which is to undermine the foundations of secular public schools and allow for our tax dollars to flow through religious charter schools. We held the line. And that same week, not as many people have heard about this, but that same week in the city of Ocala, Florida, the AHA won a lawsuit that we'd been fighting for 10 years against the city of Ocala, which used public tax dollars to hold a Christian prayer meeting that city employees were mandated to attend. We sued the city of Ocala. And a Bush-appointed judge said that he agreed with us and what they had done was unconstitutional. And we finally got the city of Ocala to settle, accept the lower court's judgment, agree what they did was wrong. We locked in precedent that said you cannot use American taxpayer money to host religious vigils. And then the next week, Pete Hegseth went out and tested it. We're trying to figure out what we want to do about that. So, all to say, yes, these are the times that try people's souls. We have it in our power to begin the world over again, and let's talk about how we do that and why humanism, we think, has an opportunity to be a driver of that change. So, as the executive director of the American Humanist Association, I'm often in a position where I get asked, what the hell is humanism? I've gotten asked, are you guys trying to all lives matter feminism? Or is this a cult? If I have 5 seconds to explain, I say humanism is for anyone who believes in the golden rule but not in God. And if I have a few more seconds, I say humanists believe in people. We believe in human worth and dignity, the idea that every one of us is equally and limitlessly good and worthwhile without needing to be saved or redeemed. I say we believe in human potential, the idea that there is no problem that humans can't solve and no truth we can't uncover as long as we live in societies that protect the right to think freely. I say we believe in human responsibility, that our highest good, the highest moral calling is not to some abstraction, not to tradition, not to superstition, but doing the right thing to lift up other people and help them live lives of freedom and flourishing in the here and now. And when I say that, I hear a lot of people say, well, I guess I was a humanist and I didn't know it yet. And so the work is having those conversations again and again, not even to convince people to believe something that's different from what they fundamentally believe, but to bring them into a community where they've always belonged. belonging is something that's personal to me because it was something that I didn't experience a lot of as a kid. A lot of people ask me how I got the name Fish, which is interesting because I don't really go up to people and be like, "How'd you get the name David?" It was so my it's a funny story. My parents didn't name me Fish; they named me something different, and I had to take matters into my own hands. My given name, get ready for this, is Fortney Hillman Stark III. You know how some names just sound Republican? You hear that name, and you're like, oh, didn't he? Wasn't that the Republican who ran for lieutenant governor of North Carolina? Wasn't that the Confederate war hero that we were arguing about making a statue of? I mean, it's you never hear somebody with 3 last names in a Roman numeral be like, oh yeah, I'm giving my share of Papa's estate to the Triangle Free Thought community. My dad, Fortney Hellman Stark Jr., a lot of people in this community know as Pete Stark, the first member of Congress to come out and openly identify with us as an atheist. And, you know, he went by the name Pete his whole life, the little traitor. And he had a son and named him Jeffrey. I've got an older half-brother named Jeff for some reason. But when I was born, I don't know if anyone's heard the Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue. When I was born, I think he had a lesson he wanted to teach me about sort of strength and courage in the face of cruelty. So I got the name Fortney Hellman Stark III. I didn't realize the name Fortney Hellman Stark III was a liability until I went to first grade. If you want to get beat up in the first grade, you can try coming in with no athletic ability and tortoiseshell glasses and a mother who dresses you head to toe in the LL Bean catalog and a copy of the Babysitter's Club book in your backpack and the name Fortney Hellman Stark III. I was getting my little butt kicked up and down the first grade hallway. And I decided I was tired of this kind of thing. I figured I had 2 options. I could change my name or learn to fight. And in my family, you could be a lot of things. You could even be religious, although this was kind of tacitly discouraged. But you had to be a pacifist. That was the rule. And so I went out looking for a new name, and I wrote down my initials, FHS, and I realized that looked a little something like fish. And I said, that's hip, that's cool, that's edgy. I bet a kid named Fish doesn't get bullied. Which was wrong. But it felt like a name I wanted to live into. It felt like somebody I wanted to be. It didn't feel like a hand-me-down from my dad of something he never even used. And so I told the teachers and the other kids, my parents, I wanted to be called Fish. And my mother was a good Berkeley-educated child development nerd. She was like, well, you know, he's going through a phase of personal exploration. And he can call himself Fish until he's ready to be called Fortney again. And I was never ready to be called Fortney again because Fish Stark is a fun name people remember, and Fortney Hellman Stark III sounds like somebody that a statue on the Duke campus they're debating whether to tear down. I used to tell this story a lot in my work before the AHA when I was working with young people. I spent a chunk of time running a program that trained and funded youth activists in 140 countries. Kiva gives microgrants to people to start goat farms. We gave microgrants to young people to, start rebellions against the autocratic government in Nigeria or to help rebuild civil society in Nepal after the earthquake. And then I went and actually visited Durham a lot. We were working with Duke scientists at a tech startup that built mental health apps for young people. And I would tell the story of my name a lot in conversations with young people, not because I think people should change their names necessarily, but because it's a reminder of something that I think is deeply human and deeply humanist. We live in a world where there is a lot that we can't control, or where we are subject to the control of other people, which can feel dehumanizing and disempowering in a way. But we always have control over who we are, what we believe, and the stories we tell about ourselves, how we show up. And that's why that's the first thing that the religious right tries to take away from us, right? The idea that our bodies, our stories, our names are our own. That's why the idea of a more expansive and free concept of gender threatens them so much, right? Because if we have the ability to tell our own stories about ourselves and to make our own changes to our bodies, that then reminds us that we can actually change things outside of ourselves too. That we have the right to assert our participation in an economy and a culture that they want to exclude us from and keep all to themselves. So here's why, after, a decade of working in the youth services and mental health industries, I wanted to come to the AHA, because ultimately it's my deep belief that we have got about 45 million humanists in America who don't know it yet. People who are broadly secular and broadly progressive, who believe in the golden rule but not in God, and who are looking for something to belong to and believe in. Because we live, right, in an increasingly atomized society. Our paychecks go less far. We can't afford to buy the homes our parents raised us in, even if we have the same jobs as they did, many of us, right? Our political voices are being broken down by racist electoral systems and money in politics. It's easy, and we have fewer friends, right? We see fewer people, we know fewer people. It's easy to feel disempowered and like we need something. And so there is a vacuum for the millions and millions of people who feel like they lack purpose and meaning that needs to be filled. Right now, it's being filled by a group of charlatans like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson, right? Young people go looking for meaning and community online, and they get sucked into this alt-right pipeline. The kind of people who were listening to Sam Harris 15 years ago are now listening to Andrew Tate. That's an existential problem that the secular and humanist communities need to solve. And so I stepped into this role 9 months ago because I believe that humanism, in a fundamental way, is positioned to fill this vacuum and to unite millions of Americans around common values and identity and purpose, to provide what Carl Rogers, who's the founder of humanistic psychology and the 1954 AHA Humanist of the Year, called self-concept. The story we tell about ourselves to ourselves, about what we believe and where we belong, and therefore who we belong to, that is the foundation of a healthy self. So we don't just have the opportunity, I think, to grow our movement, making it more popular and diverse and culturally and politically powerful. We have an opportunity to take the group of Americans who are most likely to suffer from social isolation, the nones, or the nothing in particulars, millions of them, and help answer for them this current crisis of identity and purpose. And I'm here today to share sort of a theory of action, one that we at the AHA are testing, how we draw people into communities. I think that ultimately our work is to repeat and popularize a simple truth, that humanism has been a driving force of American social innovation, not by accident, but by design. That when you bring together people who ultimately believe in reason and challenging tradition in service of what matters, and lifting up all people, you get the revolutionaries and the innovators and the healers who have defined the American spirit. But I want to talk about what we're trying to do on a strategic level, because for humanism to be successfully popularized to more people, we need to do two things. First, as a humanist movement, we need to spend a lot more time talking about what we do believe and a lot less about what we don't believe, right? Part of the reason there's such a gap between the number of people who share our secular beliefs and the people who identify with and participate in the secular community is because many of those people weren't interested in what the new atheist movement of the 2000s had to offer, this frontal focus on challenging religion. After all, when you ask a lot of people to think about the most religious person they know, they don't necessarily think of an abusive or corrupt priest. They think of grandma. I think of grandma. And not a lot of people want to be part of a movement that's anti-grandma. Not a lot of people want to be part of a movement that's fundamentally anti-anything. And many of the people to whom humanism is attractive are agnostics, right? Not motivated themselves by any kind of belief in the supernatural, not driven by that, but unwilling to call religious belief a delusion. And, second is that people don't just join movements because of intellectual alignment, right? They join them because it offers something to them. An identity, a sense of purpose, belonging, a way to answer life's questions with confidence. And so, we can believe in the correctness of our convictions, and we should, because we're right. But our message to people new to humanism has to be about how it can help them develop the things they're looking for in their lives and missing: community and confidence and coherence, which of course is what humanism has always done, right? Our belief that no one is coming to save us, and yet we're still here, implies something about what we're capable of, what we're able to do when we're challenged. The fact that we evolved from fish and built civilization without any kind of deus ex machina is a statement about what people are capable of that needs to be told and heard in a world where people feel disempowered by systems that are designed to make them feel like they can't do anything. And so ultimately, even though there's no problem we can't solve, because there's no one to swoop in and solve all the problems, and yet we're still here, is a way to communicate a sense of responsibility and agency, I think, that ultimately is what people are looking for. People aren't looking for someone to solve all their problems. They're looking to know they can do it themselves. I'm also increasingly convinced that everyone needs to feel like they can be a hero in the American story. That, in a dispossessed world, people need to hear that not only are they powerful, but they're powerful in this moment, in this time, and in this country. And I think people are looking for, especially, in our world where we look at the current way people are trying to define America as a Christian nationalist, white supremacist country with disdain, I think people are looking for a vision for what America means that is rooted in our values. And so this is something that humanism has always had an opinion on, right? Ultimately, what people want is to feel in charge of their own lives. That's the thing that right-wing charlatans like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro sell. This illusion that you can be and feel powerful through hate and discrimination. You can imagine yourself at the top of a made-up hierarchy, and that'll give you the power and purpose you're searching for. But like any cheap high, that never lasts, right? And that's probably why their followers pursue it so fervently, even though there's nothing there but emptiness. The truth is, we know what makes people feel confident. The values humanism has promoted for centuries, not hatred or hierarchy, but compassion for self and others, self-integrity and agency. Those are what make people feel good. And we know that because of the humanistic psychologists, not just Carl Rogers, but people like Dr. Spock and John Dewey have promoted it throughout the centuries. I spent my time in graduate school at Harvard studying the development of what the humanistic psychologists call self-efficacy. Right? This idea that our sense that we're capable of overcoming the obstacles that come our way. Part of how we acquire self-efficacy is through what Albert Bandura, a student of Rogers, called vicarious experience. Seeing other people, hearing stories of other people do the things that matter to us, and believing in what we can do because we see their example. Some scientists at the University of Exeter built on this to develop the motivational theory of role modeling. The idea that people are inspired to believe in what they can do by who they admire. That our role models don't only give us a sense of what is possible, but also help us understand the values and the actions that help us get to that point. In other words, if people need to see themselves as heroes in the American story, what humanism can do is offer them examples of how they are like or can become like heroes through joining the intellectual tradition of America's greatest rebels, of the people from Mark Twain to Frederick Douglass to Gloria Steinem to Kristen Bell, who have shaped American culture and politics through their humanist beliefs. So ultimately, Fred Edwards, who is a former executive director of the AHA years ago before me, called humanism a philosophy of imagination. And that might sound like a strange characterization for people who believe that rationalism is the source of truth. But talking about a philosophy of imagination, it doesn't mean we accept unprovable things to be true, right? It means that at its best, humanist inspires us to imagine better lives for ourselves and better futures for our fellow humans and work towards them. Humanism challenges us to refuse to limit ourselves and to always exist on the boundaries of the possible. And so here are some of the stories I think we can do a better job of telling about how humanists have moved America and created some of America's greatest inventions through that spirit. It starts 250 years ago with Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. Two proud humanists, right, who ultimately convinced America to cast off a king through talking about shared values, who, created what Jamie Raskin calls the original American innovation, constitutional religious freedom and liberty of conscience. This idea that our new nation would be one of free people only if we were one of free minds. And then it continued with humanists who called the country to live up to the words that Jefferson wrote but did not himself have the courage to make real, that all people are created equal. Right? We are the tradition of people who fought to move that ball forward, because without humanists, there would be no March on Washington. Right? MLK gave the speech, but it was a humanist, A. Philip Randolph, who chaired and planned that march. Without humanists, there would be no National Organization for Women, no Planned Parenthood, no ACLU, which Felix Adler helped found, right? No Ms. Magazine, which Betty Friedan started. Even, Frederick Douglass reminded us that in the struggle for justice, the only reward is to be in the struggle. And Emma Goldman reminded us that, people only have as much power and liberty as they have the intelligence to want and the courage to take. We have been the most consistent champions of a liberated America. That's our story to tell. That's our gift to give people. And we're the tradition of the humanistic psychologists, from Rogers to Dewey to Benjamin Spock to Abraham Maslow, who gave us the hierarchy of needs. We live in an age of self-help culture where people are using the language of therapy to understand themselves and change their lives. And we have a responsibility to talk about the fact that so much of that was shaped by humanists who did that work because they saw people not as problems to be solved, but resources to be poured into. That humanists actually led us down a path where we understood ourselves better, where we built a psychological culture that was based around understanding the person in front of you rather than treating them as a problem, and that has saved countless lives and allowed us better access to ourselves. We can talk about how humanist curiosity and creativity led us to everything from the personal computer to the polio vaccine. Right? Humanists include Steve Wozniak and Jonas Salk and Albert Einstein, who believed that the natural place for humans to go was to be innovating and creating and pushing on the boundaries of the possible and reimagining what could be. And it also includes people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye the Science Guy, who taught that ethic of curiosity to a new generation. Humanists transformed the boundaries of American art. Right? American art today wouldn't be what it is without people like Kurt Vonnegut or Mark Twain or Keith Haring, or the people who are pushing the boundaries of TV today like Quinta Brunson and Kristen Bell, pushing aside tradition, reaching into the depths of the imagination, and creating works that would bring tears to the eyes of the most ardent rationalist. And we should point out, humanists tend to make damn good public policy. Right? From the Dodd-Frank bill, Barney Frank, a humanist, that protected us in the financial crisis from, predatory lenders and the excesses of corporate greed, to bills like EMTALA, which protects our right to access emergency medical care when we need it, that the Biden administration used to protect women's rights to emergency abortion care, or COBRA, which lets you keep your health care when you're laid off from your job or go through a divorce. All of these were bills that were written and passed and fought for by the humanists who were representing us in Congress. And even now, humanists like Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman and Emily Randall and Yasemin Ansari — by the way, we have more non-religious members of Congress than we've ever had just in this term because of the work you fund our amazing team of lobbyists to do. We have tripled the number of non-religious members in Congress we have, and grown the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which is made up of people of all faiths standing for our rights, by 50% since the inauguration alone. And it is people, and Jared Huffman, a humanist and atheist in Congress, was the first one of us to rise and be able to get a committee chairmanship, which I will tell you from my own and my family's experience is a major domino to fall, because there was indeed a time where being openly non-religious was enough to get you kicked off your committees. And so we are seeing people like Raskin and Huffman lead the fight to defend our secular democracy. That's an incredible contribution we're making, and an important thing to remind people of. So we, and here I don't mean the left or the secular community, but I mean humanists specifically, have the opportunity to offer a new story of American heroism, one that celebrates our values as a core spark that lights the torch of freedom and progress in America, and calls people to believe in something bigger than a book or a political party, but to believe in themselves and each other. And so here's the deal. right? I promised a justification of why we are the moral majority. And if you divide Americans by who believes in God and who doesn't, then it's true that we are a minority. But if you divide Americans by humanist principles, then, when you ask about freedom of conscience, when you ask about belief in democracy, when you ask about belief in science and reason and taking care of people, then we are the moral majority. Because ultimately, 2/3 of Americans, even a majority of religious people, believe that you don't need to believe in God to be a good person. Believe that religion is a matter of personal choice. And 80% of people, even more, believe that whether or not they think you need God to be a good person or not, they believe in the separation of church and state. They believe in the fundamental American promise that everyone has the right to believe what they want to believe. And as we see in the reaction to this proposed bill to gut Medicaid and SNAP, Americans believe in treating people humanely. They don't believe that our government should be oriented around causing as much pain as possible to the elderly and the poor and the sick. 4% of people support Project 2025 when it's explained to them. We can't let the fact that our fellow citizens were misled by lies about the price of eggs fool us about the values they really have and really believe. Because right now, what we have in Washington, we have a country being controlled by an axis of nonsense. We've got the bishops who believe in religious supremacy, who believe in the idea that America should be something it was never designed to be, a nation that is, where one faith dominates. And then you have the bigots, the people who believe in racial supremacy, the people who believe in the counterfactual argument that there is one race that is designed to be a master race. And you've got the billionaires, the people who believe in the supremacy of wealth, who believe that financial might makes right and try to justify their dominion over us, their drive to pay us lower and lower wages and ratchet up their profits. And so the bishops and the bigots and the billionaires together have come together to fundamentally build a world that is not tenable. A world where everyone is feeling a little more on the edge, a little more frustrated, a little more confused, a world full of questions. And questions, I think, that have humanist answers. So they want us to accept a world where too many of us live paycheck to paycheck, able to afford less and less as their profits grow. But humanism says everyone has a right to live with dignity. They want us to live in a world that makes us feel increasingly conditional, valued only for what we produce. But humanism says we're valuable just the way we are. They want us to mistrust and suspect and despise each other, and they calibrate their technologies to push us further apart for profit. But what humanism tells us is that we find fulfillment and joy when we include others, not by pushing them away. They want us confused about what to believe. They flood our phones with propaganda and lies about vaccines and climate change and gender-affirming medical care. But humanists believe that we learn about reality from science, not nonsense. And so, ultimately, we've got these questions that people are asking. Humanism offers answers, and we have a golden opportunity right now in this age of loneliness and dispossession to reach out to people and say, you are not alone. There are so many people who think the way you do. We're not the modest minority that they think we are. We're the moral majority, and we're part of an incredible legacy. When you choose humanism, you choose to be a barrier breaker, to be on the side of the abolitionists, the feminists, the revolutionaries who toppled an autocrat. You choose to be a part of the pioneers who so believed in challenging the status quo, they gave us public schools and Apple computers and reproductive justice. We are the people who think differently, and that's why we're the people who build things. And we will be there for anyone who believes in the golden rule but not in God, for compassion, not confession, for love thy neighbor more than trust and obey, for anyone who believes that the best and greatest reward is living well and helping others on this planet and in this life because it is the only thing that is promised us. That's humanism. And when we tell that story, I think we have the opportunity to build a movement that is bigger, more welcoming, stronger, and ultimately has the power to win a more humanist world. Because as the unholy alliance of the billionaires and the bishops and the biggest wrecks our country as they hawk their dumbass trucks, exploding trucks, on the White House lawn, And as they slash the social safety net to give tax breaks to their rich friends, and as they hike our grocery prices and sink our pension funds, people are going to be looking for something different outside of the institutions that have failed them on the right and the left. And we have the ability to say, maybe what you're looking for is humanism. It's been here since the founding. It's written into our DNA. It terrifies the axis of nonsense in Washington, D.C. So this is how we're thinking about our work. I think you guys know at the American Humanist Association, we've been doing a lot of work for a long time to plug away at the levers of power in Capitol Hill and in the courts, just as the religious right has done for decades, right? It's not sexy for us to be thinking about how we get a backbencher congresswoman from, Michigan to join a congressional caucus and be in a Signal group chat with other people, or how we litigate the specifics of a case in a town of 40,000 people in Florida. And yet the work of establishing precedent and building coalitions and using the minutiae of our political process to slowly build a movement that can't be denied is how the religious right won. But what we also need is a narrative that calls people into us who right now are mostly just sitting at home doing phone. And ultimately, I think that what we do is root that narrative not in what we believe to be correct, but the example of people who have changed America through their humanism, because then we can say to people, you're not coming here to be alone and separate and different and special from everyone else. You are coming to be part of something that's existed before you, will exist beyond you, and has included a group of some of the most incredible people in American history. So, all that being said, thanks to those of you who are members of the AHA and the support you give us. And for those of you who are interested in coming on board, if you become a member of the American Humanist Association, you not only support our political work and our cultural work and our work to do things like train humanist hospital chaplains, or humanists who work on college campuses, but you also get an incredible magazine every quarter, and you get to join our Discord server, and you get to vote for our board. There's a lot of work that we need to do, and we're hoping to have some of your help in doing it. But most importantly, whether you become a member of the AHA or not, what I'm hoping is that, and what I say whenever I'm going and talking anywhere in the country, is that I hope more and more people here feel empowered to proudly claim and shout their humanism and to explain it to other people and tell stories about what it does for you and what it's meant for us. Because ultimately, the bigger we grow our community, the more power we're going to have to respond to the tyranny and the paternalism of the religious right. And it's hard work, right? Welcoming other people in is always a challenging act because it brings our uniqueness into tension with theirs. But the only belief system that never calls on us to do anything challenging is relativism. And the right side of history is always found on the other side of a mountain. As for me and my house, as the saying goes, we will serve humanity. Thank you, guys, and I'm excited to take your questions. So, yeah, I don't know how long we have for questions, Marcus.
We got 45 minutes. Well, probably 30 minutes, I would say.
I was going to say 45 minutes is a long time. Y'all don't want to hear me talk for that long. But happy to take questions either in general about, because I know not everyone in here necessarily considers themselves a humanist. What is humanism? How did it come to be? How are we thinking about defining it? How has humanism changed over the years? Or the tactical work of the AHA. What are we doing in our education center, in our policy work, in our legal center? Questions, concerns, criticisms. You want to tell me my hair looks bad? Happy to hear all of it. I saw you had a question, sir. You can copy and paste anything we have ever written or said. Yes, thank you for that reminder, Marcus. So, what was your name? So Frank said that he liked the talk and he had gotten an email from us that he liked and he wants to share it. With my words, is it okay to copy and paste that? Is it okay to share it out? Yes. We are making more media that is designed to be shared. We are making weekly videos to explain Trump's war against the separation of church and state that have been shared thousands of times and watched hundreds of thousands of times. We want that to be shared. We're publishing more magazine articles on our online magazine, The Humanist, than ever before. We want those to be shared. Ultimately, we think humanism is a winning argument if more people hear about it. And the Achilles heel for the movement is not that we have bad things to say, but that we just talk to ourselves rather than talking to other people. So yes, anything you've heard me say, anything you see me write, take it, share it. It doesn't matter if my name is on it. What matters is if people understand that is what humanists believe, and if you agree with it, you're welcome in the humanist community. Yes, in the back.
Scott.
Hey, Scott.
I just wondered what, in terms of attacks or other things that as humanism becomes or is recognized both locally and nationally, maybe even internationally, what kinds of things are you seeing that people are striking back in order to try to discredit or to otherwise minimize what humanists are doing?
I love that. So Scott asks, how are people attacking us? And how do we respond to that? So Vice President Vance went on a podcast before the election. Not a lot of people caught this, but he said the problem with atheists and agnostics is that they don't have a real belief system. You can't have a real moral belief system without a God, which is rich for someone who was an atheist 5 years ago to say. And for that matter, is rich for someone who is talking about Catholic doctrine, but left law school, went to work for Peter Thiel as a venture capitalist, then moved home to start a fake nonprofit to help people with opioid addiction that didn't actually help people with opioid addiction to run for Senate. Like, let's talk about who's got a fake belief system here. But we have to contend with the idea that A, we don't really believe anything, and that B, our lack of sort of a affirming or punishing creator God makes our belief hollow. To the question of we don't believe in anything, I think that's an easy one to refute. Again, we have had people carrying the torch of humanism for a long time, and you can sort of map, right? If you think about what do Mark Twain and Frederick Douglass and Gloria Steinem have in common, right? Humanists are people who believe that authority and tradition are not self-justifying. We believe that actually to live a good life and to build a good society, we need to think critically about what we are doing now so that we can figure out how to do it better. And we need to think about it through a lens of what we know to be true. Science tells us what's true, and how other people are experiencing the world. Science gives us the truth, and compassion and empathy tell us what's right. So we have things we believe, right? We listen deeply to other people's experiences, and we care about everyone being treated fairly and lifted up. We listen and look for what's true, and we believe science helps us understand the world, and we believe in constant self-improvement and improvement of the world to build a place where everyone can flourish. Then the question is, okay, yeah, but without somebody threatening to punish you, how are you ever going to do anything good? And there we have to realize we're actually arguing from the popular position, right? Again, 2/3 of Americans, even a majority of religious Americans, believe atheists can be good people, believe you do not have to be good under the threat of divine punishment, right? So that position that Vance is arguing is already a position that is not moral. But how are we good? Well, number one, we hold each other accountable. That's why community matters, right? We have people in our own lives that we don't want to disappoint. And number two, and again, this is what the humanistic psychologist taught us, like, what we've learned is that shame and threats don't actually change people's behavior, right? That's why, that's why we don't make, people who are trying to go into recovery for addiction stand out on street corners with a sign that says, honk at me, I'm bad because I use drugs, right? We know that actually, if you want to build sustainable behavior change in a person, you help them identify the kind of person you want to be, and you encourage them to take actions that are in line with that framework. So we know what makes people good. It's not the culture of shame that so many conservative religious people promote. It's the culture we promote that gives people the freedom to decide the kind of person they want to be, and gives them the support to act as if they're that kind of person. So we're going to hear that you all don't believe in anything, or maybe you believe in stuff, but you're not going to have the external discipline to make it real. And we've got to be prepared to fight back and know that that is the last gasp of a community that is throwing everything at the wall because they are terrified of the secular march of this country. Yeah. So Jackie, the question is, how do we relate to people who share our beliefs about what is morally right, but maybe think differently than us about the supernatural and what is real, right? And I think here's what's interesting, right? I think there is a dividing line with humanism that's a little bit different from the dividing line around atheism, right? Humanism has always included people like Thomas Paine, for example, who was a deist, right? Paine did not, in any sense, believe that there was a world was 6,000 years old, or there was a God who was watching over us, who decided whether we went to heaven and hell if we died, or was judged. But Paine believed that there was probably a God involved in the creation of the universe somehow, and he's always been a part of our tradition, right? Here's part of the way I think about it. So again, Fred Edwards, who was a wiser man than I and led the AHA for a long time back in the 80s and 90s. When he talked about humanism as a philosophy of imagination, he said it's a philosophy of imagination. It's also a philosophy of science and reason. We can't know whether something is absolutely true unless it can be proven through science and reason. But we do think that hunches and flashes of inspiration and altered states of consciousness and even religious experiences are part of the human experience. And they can they are not alone sufficient to prove something true, but they can reveal wisdom to us, right? They can make us aware of ideas that could then be tested through reason and proven. Now, none of this is what I would use to explain to your friend, right? I say this to sort of get us in the room on the same page of sort of how a humanist philosophy at its core could be sort of concordant with someone who says, well, I believe in science, but I also believe in God. And I think the question there is, well, number one is what's God, right? Because I have people who come up to me and tell me God is consciousness. And I say, well, I believe in consciousness. I just don't call it God, right? Like, I actually believe that consciousness is what makes humans special. It's not an immortal soul. It's not an intelligently designed body. It's the fact that we can think for ourselves and we're connected to other people from common humanity. So number one, like, I think that you start by being curious about the concept of God and see if that's closer to our own. But the other thing is that I think sometimes people have a very personal conception of belief, right? That it's a cultural tradition, right? Or it's a familial tradition, or it's something that is comforting for them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it is a truth to them that they base their understanding of what is empirically real on. It sounds like that's what applies to your friend. And so I think she's Italian. There you go. And so I think the way I try to say it in 10 words is science tells us what's real and empathy tells us what's right. And if part of how you get there is you have a religious tradition that sort of helps shape your values and helps connect you with people, and maybe you have a sense of belief that something is out there, but you wouldn't say to someone this is absolutely provable, then we want you in the tent. Because especially I think that humanism needs to reject the philosophy that we see in a lot of places, where you have to agree with 100% of everything we've ever thought if you want to belong in the community, right? We see the religious right do this. We see plenty of other communities on the left do this. I think that ultimately we've got a lot more in common with people who have, again, this cultural or spiritual conception of maybe there's something else out there, but are pro-humanity and pro-science than someone who calls themselves an atheist but does not believe, say, in providing for the poor and sick, or in compassion towards people of different genders or sexualities. So that's where I would start. Yeah, Marcus. Yeah, please.
You talked a little bit about how you think there's 45 million humanists in this country, and you said that's based on some polling and modeling. Can you give some more color to that?
Yes, so I'm very excited to talk about this. The AHA is working on a $250,000 research study. We're involving hundreds of people across the US, and we're thinking about what is the story we can tell about humanism that brings people who are broadly secular and broadly progressive into community with one another. And to do that, we've looked at the Pew poll from 2023 to 2024. Every few years, Pew Research does a 2-year study on religion in America. They surveyed 36,000 people to build a model of what religious people in America think. Now, all the people in America, about 30% they found are not religious. They are nothing in particular, right? Or none, or atheist or agnostic. Now, 30% of people in America is a lot more than 100 million, but not all of those people, some of those people are sort of very certain that, there are unprovable things that can be true, right? They sort of are science rejectors. And some of them are people rejectors, right? They have nasty thoughts about people who don't look like them or think like them. But when you use a set of questions to narrow down the survey, when you ask people when you narrow it for people who don't believe in God or who aren't really sure, maybe there's a God, maybe not, it's not very important, and who believe that you can be a good person without believing in God, and who believe in, say, gay marriage and evolution as absolute truths, or if gay marriage is an absolute good and evolution is an absolute truth, and the importance of science to help us determine what is right, then you get about 45 million Americans. When you narrow down that set of humanist beliefs around freedom of conscience, inherent worth and dignity of all people, the primacy of science, and God is either not real or I don't know and it's not that important. And so, to be clear, I think we should be speaking to 300 million people in America about what humanism is, because we want even people who don't see the world the way we do, we want to be accepting of us, or we want to work together on issues where we may not 100% agree. But in terms of people who, we've all had the conversation, right? Or many of us have, where we talk about what humanism is and someone says, oh yeah, that's me. And so how many people we can do that with? We think it's about 45 million based on the Pew data. Hey, Thomas. That's a good question. I think that humanism and sentientism are entirely compatible. I've met a ton of people who believe both things, right? There's nothing in humanism that asks us to privilege humans above animals or the planet, right? Humanism is a word that refers to a philosophy about rooting our beliefs in impact in the here and now. It is a sort of a pragmatic materialist philosophy that believes we should, judge our actions by their consequences and how they affect the community around us, not based on whether they agree with some sort of centuries old doctrine in a book. And so I think of that a lot of people interpret their humanist obligations as sentientism and saying we also should be vegan and we also should do work to protect the planet. Not everyone reads it that way, and I think our definition of, at least the definition of humanism I use, needs to be big enough to include a lot of different types of humanists. But I think if you ask someone that question, or if somebody asked me that question, I would say, I don't think these things are incompatible at all. I don't think humanism requires that we center humans above other forms of life. I think it says we center humanity, broadly speaking, as it is today, over abstractions and superstitions. Yes. All the time. How does the American Humanist Association's legal team pick cases? That is a good one. And I will tell you what we're trying to do, because yes, we cannot fight everything that they're doing. And more to the point, we can't fight every battle because there are other allies in the progressive community who do that, right? So it's a good, we all right now have a responsibility to defeat authority. I'm going to talk a little broadly and then I'll talk about legal specifically, I promise. We all have an incredible responsibility to defeat authoritarianism, right? And to defeat its consequences, the consequences for reproductive freedom and people of color and women and trans people and immigrants and kids and everything. The American Humanist Association, on a good day, is a $3 million organization. That means we have 4% of the budget of Joel Osteen's megachurch to represent every humanist in America. And if you add together the American Humanist Association and American Atheists and Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Center for Inquiry, all the secular organizations in America still have less than half the budget of Joel Osteen's megachurch. So, we have to be thoughtful about what we do, right? There is, we are tabling at World Pride this weekend. We're in support of the work the LGBTQ community does, and we advocate with Planned Parenthood, but we know there are issues where other groups are taking the lead. What we have the opportunity to do right now that plays our part is raise the salience of the Trump administration's outright war on church-state separation and the freedom of conscience, because this is not what Americans voted for and not what they want, even religious and conservative ones. Here's a crazy stat, and you should throw this around all the time. Trump's Anti-Christian Bias Commission is opposed by a majority of Christians. 78% of people in America think Trump's Anti-Christian Bias Commission is bullshit because they live in the real world with the rest of us, and they understand there's not systemic discrimination against Christians in America, and they really just want housing and eggs to be cheaper. And so, in the same way, the radical right really had during the Biden presidency a drip of stories. It's like, well, here's this thing they're doing now, and why are they focusing on this rather than the price of eggs? And that was everything you saw whenever you went on the internet. We have the responsibility to do the same thing and say, look at all these windmills they're tilting at, where they're out of step with most Americans, and it's not doing anything to make life more affordable for us. And we have the ability more than anyone else to specifically do that on the church-state separation issues that are absurd and not what people voted for. So, in terms of the cases we're taking specifically, we are really lucky. We just brought on an incredible new legal director from, has anyone heard of Compassion and Choices? The organization that fights for everyone to be able to access assisted suicide, death with dignity. We brought on one of their senior litigators to be the new legal director at the AHA. His name is Amitai Heller, brilliant dude. I have to be very circumspect in talking about the kinds of cases we're working on right now, but we are focusing on cases, two kinds of cases. One, we are focusing on discrimination against atheists and humanists in housing and employment and healthcare, because ultimately there are a bunch of religious people in this country who think we're all going to hell, but that doesn't mean they think we should get fired from McDonald's, right? Like, there are plenty of people who may be mistrustful of atheists or humanists, but when it comes to discrimination against us, they believe we have as much right as everyone else to have our beliefs and participate in society. And the truth is, in blue bubbles like where I live in Annapolis, Maryland, people know what I do, and I don't face any kind of harassment or discrimination. But this is North Carolina. I used to live in Charleston, West Virginia. We know that the experience of a red state or a rural atheist is deeply different. That people live in fear of getting fired from their jobs or getting denied health care or losing their housing if they come out and say who they are. And so we are focusing, number one, on fighting those kinds of cases, not only because we're talking about defending people's livelihoods, but when we fight those and we win, we put bad actors on notice that you can't discriminate against our community. And when those cases go public, we will be able to say, this is what the far right wants to do everywhere in the country. Is this what you support? And a vast majority of religious people will join us in saying, no, this is absurd. So I will say, if anyone in here has experienced or knows of anyone who has experienced illegal discrimination on the basis of your beliefs, tell us. Not every case we hear about is a case that ends up being we're able to litigate or able to take, but we want to hear about all of them. Ultimately, if somebody can't do something to someone for being Jewish or Muslim, they can't do it to them for being atheist or humanist either. So tell us that. The other thing that we want to fight for is if a little bit of malicious compliance with religious freedom laws, right? If under the new nonsense religious freedom doctrine that the Supreme Court and others are pushing, Christians can ignore discrimination laws and call it their faith, then why the heck can't we say, actually, as humanists, we have a religious right to access gender-affirming care? Or we have a religious right to access abortion, or we have a religious right to be able to smoke marijuana because our belief system, a belief system that's been around for hundreds of years, right, that is has people who've believed it at the founding, has chaplains representing it, working in hospitals and prisons and college campuses right now. Why doesn't that entitle us to the same ability that Christians now seem to have in America to pick and choose which laws to follow? So we're looking at opportunities to say, especially on things like death with dignity, to say actually humanists have a right to this thing that the religious right wants to not deny us based on our belief system. So those are the two kinds of cases we're looking at taking. We're really excited about some of the things that we're working up in the hopper that you guys will hear about in a few months. But if anyone, again, has experienced any kind of discrimination, we want to hear about it immediately, because there's a chance we may be able to represent you and win a victory, not just for you, but then greater protections for every single person in our movement. That sounds like a plan. Last question. Yes. I love two-part questions. Yep. Yep. Right. That's like a 4 or 5 part question, but I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's good. So let's talk about the strategy, and then we can talk about the coalition, right? Ultimately, what we have to do is what we saw the religious right do over the last 10 to 15 years, right? Which is they went to places where people were already consuming content and already asking questions about identity and meaning and purpose, and they relentlessly flooded the zone with content while we were putting out a magazine, right? We have brought on an incredible communications team. Anyone in here follow national politics? Anyone know Ben Wickler, who flipped Wisconsin in 2018 and 2020, got Scott Walker out, flipped it by the largest margin of any? We hired Ben Wickler as communications director, and we are building short form video, podcast, like a series of new media resources to explain humanism, to go into the same environments where Jordan Peterson is winning young people who come asking apolitical and non-religious questions about how do I feel happy in a shitty world, and pipelining them into the alt-right with our own questions about here is how humanism can help you answer these big questions with confidence and give you a sense of purpose and meaning. We are testing out, I literally have a podcast script draft open on my laptop right now that I'm going to work on tonight when I go back to my hotel. We are testing these things out throughout the summer for a launch in the late summer or early fall. Again, we think that you have to meet people where they are and then take them where they want to go. And so where people are right now, especially younger generations, is on TikTok, Spotify, YouTube. We are investing we've raised our donations in the last 9 months have gone up about 50%. Part of that is, new executive director energy. Part of that is Trump. Part of that is who knows. And we are reinvesting those funds into reaching people on digital platforms. So that's number one. And then the other question is how broad do we want to build humanism? And I think the question shouldn't be who do we want to bring in, but how do we clarify humanism's values and tell a good story about those, and then let anyone who believes they belong here come in without enacting lots of gates and litmus tests, right? I don't think humanism is inherently leftist so much as I think the current American left is the only party that is humanist. I don't think that was the case 50 years ago. I think 50 years ago you could have found a humanist Republican. I think maybe even 30 years ago you could have found a humanist Republican. There's one humanist Republican I know, he's 87, who is both a very committed humanist and has been a very committed Republican for a long time. I believe that those things are possible, but we also have a current environment where there's one party that literally rejects the right of people to self-determine and to whose answer to how are you going to, like, how am I going to live if you cut my health care is, well, we're all going to die. And that's okay because Jesus Christ is going to save us if you're the right kind of religion, right? Like, so it, again, I don't like the idea that humanist values only belong in one political party in America right now. And frankly, I hope we have a political realignment in the future, as we have throughout our history, where we can have more than one political party that represents our beliefs. I think that would be good for humanism. I think that would be good for America, even if it's not the case right now. So I think the work we have to do is clarify and tell the story about what we believe and invite anyone in who agrees and make them feel welcome. I don't mean for that to be a non-answer, but I think that's our job, and other people can decide where they belong. Thank you, Marcus. And I'm going to be at dinner, so I can hang out and answer any questions that you want. Thanks. All right. Oh, pardon me.